This is the last set of questions solving the quadratic equations using the square root property. These are about as complicated as they get. Let's look at the first one together. Remember, we want to isolate the square, so we're going to add 100 to both sides. And while I'm doing this, I should say something about using this property. Just like when we were graphing lines, I said you might be asked to use a specific method, graph using the intercepts, graph using point slope form. If we ask you to solve this equation using the square root property, this is what we expect. You can't open the brackets and factor. That would not be what we want. So make sure you know how to do each of these methods so we can ask any one of them from you. Now that we've isolated the square, we have two equations. 3x plus 2 equals the positive root of 100. 3x plus 2 equals the negative root of 100. We know the square root of 100 is 10. And again, I think these equations illustrate why, right from the beginning, I said you should always write this as two equations. These are simple linear equations now. We're going to subtract 2 so that we can get to our variable and divide by 3. Subtract 2 and divide by 3. In question 8, I see that you don't have a perfect square there, but you should be able to simplify that square root of 32 and solve the equation. Pause your video, give it a try. And now you have two equations. Before you go any further, you should simplify that square root of 32. If you had difficulty simplifying that, please go back to the chapter on simplifying radicals and do more practice. This is important stuff for the final exam and for Math 103. Now we're going to add 7 to both sides and then divide both sides by 3. Again, notice that we've written 7 in front of the radical, and we have two solutions. So if we were asked to write this as two solutions separated by a comma, we could do that. Or we could say that x equals 7 plus or minus 4 root 2 all over 3. And again, those of you familiar with the quadratic formula already know that that looks very familiar. Questions 9 and 10 just have one extra little step in them. Let's work through this. We want to isolate our square, so we add 18 to both sides, divide by 3. Now we have two equations. Add 2 to both sides. Oops, that's not adding 2 to both sides. And there we have our two answers, either written separated by a comma or 2 plus or minus the square root of 6. Pause your video. Try question 10. The first thing you did was isolate your square. Now you have two equations. After we had our two equations, we added 3 to both sides and divided both sides by 2. Again, we have two answers that could be separated by a comma, or x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 all over 2. So right now we have three methods for solving quadratic equations. 3, 2. 2, solving by factoring, and the square root method. Make sure you practice those enough before you move on to the next method.